The physical aspects of the Realme 3i are identical to the Realme 3 right down to the last millimeter and gram. It's comfortable to hold and it's not too heavy at only 175 grams, and it's easy to grip and use with one hand. The main aesthetic difference between this and the Realme 3 is the use of a matte finish with a diamond pattern on the back, similar to the C2. In the front, there's a 6.2-inch HD Plus panel with Corning Gorilla Glass 3. The phone also has a dewdrop notch, which makes it look relatively modern. The display has good brightness, colors are punchy, and viewing angles are quite good too. The power and volume buttons have a clicky response and are ergonomically placed. There's a triple slot tray on the left which can accommodate two 4G nano SIMs and a microSD card all at once. The fingerprint sensor is also easy to reach and it works well. There's also face recognition which, just like previous Realme phones, works insanely quickly. The Realme 3i has a MediaTek Helio P60 SoC in place of a Helio P70 that powers the Realme 3. This isn't a huge downgrade as the P60 is still a very capable octa-core chip with good CPU and GPU performance for its class. The two variants include one with 3GB of RAM and 32GB of storage, while the other has 4GB of RAM and 64GB of storage, which is the one we have. The software is fairly up to date just like on the Realme X. The 3i runs on ColorOS 6, which is based on Android 9 Pie. The app drawer is now enabled by default, but you can switch back to the single layered look if you prefer that. There are also a whole bunch of preloaded apps, but at least all the third-party ones can be uninstalled. You also get the usual shortcuts and gestures, including a smart sidebar which can hold shortcuts to apps and can be accessed by swiping in from the edge of the display. The 4GB RAM version that we used for several days fared pretty well with regular day-to-day use. Getting around Android's menus was painless, and the phone didn't heat up at all when we weren't stressing the CPU or the GPU. In games, it did get a little warm, but not to the extent that would make you sit up and take notice. Now when it comes to gaming, the Realme 3i is no slouch. Sure, you'll have to play with reduced graphics quality settings for higher-end titles such as PUBG Mobile, which means there's some visible aliasing around edges of objects, but at least gameplay doesn't suffer too much. ColorOS also has this feature called Game Space, which automatically locks the screen brightness and prioritizes system resources towards the game. Coming to the cameras, not much is different here compared to the Realme 3. The 3i once again features a main 13-megapixel sensor with an f1.8 aperture and phase detection autofocus. There's also a secondary 2-megapixel sensor for depth calculations when shooting in portrait mode. Now the camera is quick at focusing thanks to the PDAF, but only when there's adequate light on your subject. Landscape shots pack in decent level of detail, but complex textures such as small leaves or even trees in the distance were not very distinct. We also noticed lots of chromatic aberration when shooting objects against the light. Close-ups generally fared a bit better, but some of our macros looked quite flat despite shooting in relatively controlled environments. The 2-megapixel second sensor does a decent job of calculating depth, but there were times, especially when taking portraits of people, where this phone got the edges a bit wrong. Creative modes such as Chroma Boost and Nightscape are present too. The former should be avoided when shooting plants or foliage, as green tones get highly exaggerated. However, landscapes such as the city skyline can benefit from a boost in color. Nightscape works, but not as well as we saw on the Realme X, mostly due to the limitations of the sensor. Night scenes look brighter than those taken in the standard auto camera mode, but there's lots of grain and chroma noise. When shooting without Nightscape enabled, the camera struggles to focus on close-up objects and landscapes lack good detail. The 13-megapixel selfie camera isn't too bad. If you're patient and the light is good, you can manage to get some pretty usable shots. There's portrait mode here too, but the blur effect is too aggressive and looks quite artificial. There's also no way to adjust it. The Realme 3i can shoot up to 1080p video, but there's no stabilization here. In fact, video isn't even stabilized at 720p, which is a little disappointing. Image quality is also average, but focusing speed isn't too bad, at least under good light. Now this phone has a 4230 mAh battery, which lasted for almost 17 hours in our HD video loop test, which is very good. With actual usage, we easily managed to get a day and a half of runtime, or even more with a bit of gaming and camera use thrown in. There's no fast charging unfortunately, and charging it all the way to 100% from zero can take nearly 3 hours. The sole purpose of the Realme 3i existing is to plug that price gap between the Realme C2 and the Realme 3. The base variant at 7,999 rupees is a decent pick, as it's 1,000 rupees less expensive than the Redmi 7 with the same amounts of RAM and storage. The 4GB version of the Realme 3i is a little tough to recommend, as even though it's still priced lower than the Realme 3, at nearly 10,000 rupees, it competes with a higher tier of phones such as the Redmi Note 7S, Asus Zenfone Max Pro M2 and even the Realme U1.